All right, and we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Network Roundtable, Software Side of Business, where we are going to be discussing different core values and how they relate to business. Today we have honesty and integrity on our table, and we have the very handsome gentleman, David Amerland, and Oleg, and don't make me say your last name.
Is that a code word for him?
Oh, and we have our lovely hosts, Gina, Fiedel, and Marilyn Marilyn Moore. Yeah, what's a hangout without a freak out? I'm totally freaking out because we had to start late. So. But I really appreciate all of you joining us, and I'm just really excited to get this discussion going. Over to you, Gina.
Well, let's see. You know, when we have this Excel spreadsheet for a Network Roundtable with all of our list of core values, and I just grabbed the honesty and integrity one, thinking this is a total slam dunk, no-brainer, really simple, just really clear, and I really wanted to have David on. And as I've lived with that over the period of a few months and written about it and really kind of gone deeply into it, I've realized that with the exception of the absolutes, you know, like the dog ate my homework, it's obviously a lie, or honey, I did the dishes, see, you can see that they're all clean, those really standard, absolute, factual types of truth-telling, really, honesty and integrity is a mercurial kind of elusive thing. And the deeper we get into it and the more we kind of peel away the layers of the onion, the more complex it becomes. So I'm sure that we're going to be talking about all of that deeper stuff today, but before we do, since we do have David Amerland here, David, I would really love it, and I'm sure that our audience would really appreciate kind of going at this in the beginning from a practical sense. And if you could sort of share with us some of your ideas about our identity, you know, how we're earning trust and how we're using our honesty and integrity and the transparency that we're all kind of coping with and inviting now, and how we approach our honesty and truthfulness through that, and how it affects us for our online and our building our businesses and our authority.
Okay, certainly, and I'm very glad you prefaced this in such a way. We're used to thinking that integrity and honesty are such fundamental elements of the human condition that we all have a very clear understanding what they are. And the more we look at it in a global context and in a situation which is ever shifting, the more we realize that our idea and perception of what constitutes integrity and honesty is usually very contextual. And in the past, we used to have this multiple fragmented identity syndrome, where we were one thing within our family boundaries, and we behaved in a certain way there, and we're a different thing again outside our home to our neighbors, and a different thing again outside our neighbors to our professional circles, and so on and so on. And the more distant we became from the core connections and relationships of the home, which is familial basis, the more complicated our honesty and integrity became, the more fluid perhaps it became, the more contextualized, and the more relativistic it seems to be. And this creates a paradox. We can't really, in a global setting, in a social media world where there is transparency, say that everything is relative, because if that's the case, then we get into a situation where nothing is ever really true and everything is permitted. And we know this isn't true. We do know there's a sense of core integrity, a core sense of values which identify us all as humans. And that's what actually begins to predicate or create the basis for relationships on any level, whether it is personal or professional or communal or in any of those senses. So really we're beginning to step by degrees into terra incognita. We basically are on unknown ground, making up the rules as we go along. We're beginning to see that everything that we call a value whether it's integrity or authority or honesty or trust, is actually can be broken down into specific elements, which can be studied, given a value to, and a specific kind of conduct can actually be ascribed to them. Which means that we can actually work consciously towards that. That opens up all sorts of implications. Yes, we can become better, as in becoming more honest, more transparent, acquiring more integrity, and generating more trust. The flip side of that is we can also become more manipulative to some extent. So within a very narrow context, perhaps we can appear to be more of all those things without actually ever being those things. How we square this circle now really depends upon the length of contact and the context within which everything happens. So really, if we are thinking of fooling somebody, within inverted commas, within a narrow context on a very short period of time, yes, we can. Long term, we can't, simply because we can't sustain it long enough. And the more connections we have, the more contact we have, the easier it becomes for people to spot when we're not being true, and the harder it is for us to lie. But we're still evolving. We haven't really got a formula on how we achieve this, and this kind of discussion we're having right now is very much part of that process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for prefacing that and for giving our show, kind of the substance, the legs that we need to go forward in it. Before we continue, we kind of have a couple traditions with Network Roundtable that I'd like to honor and ask for you, David, to please let us know why you picked Oleg to be your sidekick, and then we'll turn it around and ask Oleg to then tell us, how much he loves and adores you.
Well, that's an easy one for me. I met Oleg casually on G+, and we sort of connected over things. Now, I don't have, strictly speaking, a professional relationship with him. Although he works in a sort of peripheral area in tech, really there's no impact on what I do and what he does professionally, so there is no real professional ties which would sort of create a kind of symmetrical balance of power between me and him, me doing something for him and him doing something for me, and so on. So essentially, if him and I don't see eye to eye and we decide to go our separate ways entirely on something, there's absolutely nothing to stop us doing so, and there's no repercussion professionally or even reputationally on that. And with over the time, I should say, with my discussions with him, I must say I don't always agree with what he says. He doesn't always agree with the things which I say, but he's always prepared to give depth and context to his point of view, and I totally value the quality of thinking that he actually brings into it. So he doesn't just say things because he wants to say them. He doesn't go with trends or fads. He actually works from conviction. And whether that conviction is wrong or right is totally irrelevant. The moment somebody has a conviction about something and they're prepared to work from that content and even perhaps think about it, I think that's something which you always need to be able to honor and respect. And that's how my respect for him has actually grown. He's on the most, if it comes to integrity, or a sense of integrity in terms of somebody being constant in who they are. I think Oleg has to be one of the few people which I know personally, have come to know personally, who actually represents that.
Super cool.
Hello?
All right. Yeah, go for it.
Just wanted to give a quick shout out to Mia Voss. That's what the crown is playing over there.
That was awesome.
Okay, so hopefully it's off now.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Unfortunately, I had David muted, so I don't know if he said. I'm assuming he said that the glasses, by the way, is the KGB security look.
We love them. We love those glasses.
So we have both. We had the the security in that, and I unfortunately I had the thing muted, so I'm assuming David just said that he always agrees with me on everything, and he loves all of my content and all of that, and the only time at all actually doesn't happen. I think that probably, I'm assuming that's what he said. Sorry, David, I missed it. I'm not going to ask you.
No problem at all. You're close enough.
Say, with that being the case. But seriously, jokes aside, I had the pleasure of meeting David like he said, over a year ago. And it doesn't take much for somebody to just go into the shock state when you listen to somebody like David, and in terms of things he says, in terms of things he's done, the way he says things. You take, basically all you have to do is read one of his Sunday reads, and you already get an idea of the depth of the man's mind, his character, his compassion, his drive. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And in case you're wondering if David is paying me by the word I'm using, yes. Yeah, the payment is by each word. The more words I use, the more the payment is going to be in the end.
That's how it works, yeah.
So I'm just going to continue to, But, seriously, jokes aside, David and I kind of collaborated a little bit on his book from a standpoint of, I had this idea about this tool that I thought would be useful to use some of the Google technology to be able to help people that buy his book, and he thought it was a good idea, and so we kind of went into that, and I put it together, and with his obviously approval and his participation, so we kind of got to work a little bit closer. Like you said, we didn't. That was a joke about me not hearing anything, by the way. That we do not have a professional relationship in terms of working on projects together or anything else yet. David forgot to say yet, the word yet, but certainly this personal communication. And David is politically a little bit more on the left side. David, correct me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, I mean. And I'm everybody knows that I'm on the right side. So we definitely clash a little bit when it comes to some of the political stuff. But I think the important part that David mentioned that I totally agree with him on, it's important. There's nothing wrong with having disagreement on any topic with anybody. The important thing is not to jump in, grab each other by the throat, and see who kills first. The idea is that, yeah, some people have different opinions. We all are different people. There was a post that David and I talked about this morning that he actually put together, and we kind of talked about this topic a little bit, about the fact that you can have disagreements. There's nothing wrong with having disagreements, and you can amicably and honestly and rationally, although rationale it's a little bit of a dirty word in my mind, because people use rationale to just justify almost anything, but rationally in a good way, to still be able to just agree to disagree, because there's many things we agree on. And that's, I think, is true of all the people, is that the part about being honest and having high integrity does not mean you need to be congruent with everything that somebody else thinks or the way their values are or anything else. To me, there's absolutely no reason why reasonable people cannot disagree on things, yet still find compromise, number one. I mean, because that's, if you don't do that, then you're not going to have any relationship with anybody. If you want to live by yourself, by all means, but we're not built that way. So it ends up being completely incongruent to the fact that we need to interact with other people. When we create, if you think about it, if you go create a post, you don't create a post for yourself. I mean, that would be a total waste of time. You already know what it is. You know what to put out there. So what do? You create it for somebody. It may be public at large. It might be just David Amerland by himself. But at the same time, the whole idea is you're sharing it with somebody. So you're creating it for somebody. Everything that we do on Google Plus, everything else, is for somebody. So when you look at it from that standpoint, in terms of having relationships, in terms of having collaborations, in terms of being able to build anything, then you wind up with the situation that I'm talking about, that you need to be able to compromise, you need to be able to get along in a meaningful way, then things get done. Otherwise, nothing gets done. So that's why I have a tremendous respect and admiration for David for what he does. And even though we may disagree on a few things, there are so many more things we do agree on. And I have tremendous respect for the man for just doing things the way he's doing them. I mean, that's basically my take on David.
So, if it's okay, Kristen, I'd love to go back to what David was saying prior to our Love Fest, which I really enjoyed. So the picture that you just kind of made for us it illustrates how we're really inventing as we go along. So that brings up a question for me about consistency. And because the truth and honesty are so complicated even within our own individual systems, how do you have any suggestions for our audience, any ideas about where our level of consistency falls into place? What happens when there's a discontiguous feel to how we respond depending on our... So we also are involved in so many different contexts all the time, all day long when we're on social media. So I'm kind of would like to steer you into that territory.
Well, first of all, for the first time in our development, I suppose, we're beginning to step from the narrow local place where we are onto a global stage where we potentially talk to people from different cultures, different nationalities, and very much different agendas, intents, and experiences from our own. And this is where we need to be guided by something more than just a narrow context of what we do. And if we just apply this to somebody like me, for instance, if I'm on Google+, I'm not going to get many corporate clients approaching me on Google+, because they're not there. So this is not my intent. If I think that what I want to do is sell my books, then all I do is all day long put out a sales message for my books, which entirely defeats the purpose. So really, I need to be able to do more things in a different way. And the only way to do that is to find something which is bigger than me in many ways to focus on, which means that in order to do that, I have to think very carefully about my core values and my core sort of beliefs and how they touch upon the potential audience that I have and the people I come across. And I work from there, from that perspective. And essentially, this is where, you mentioned, Gina, that we are making things up as we go along. It's a very self-creational approach which requires the cooperation of others. This is where the conversation comes through. You set something out and you see what the appeal is, you take on board the ideas and the engagement, and essentially you flow from there. And it's a very tentative, very human approach to essentially creating connections, as opposed to a very targeted marketing approach to throwing things up and seeing what sticks and going with that, because that is very finite and it has a very very limited shelf life. And that is the only way I can see of us moving forward, of actually beginning to understand that despite all the differences that we face, there are underpinning similarities which we need to unearth. They're not easy to get at. So if we apply that, then we can find for ourselves a template which allows us to be us, find people who contribute to what we're trying to do as we contribute to what they're trying to do, without falling into the trap of a cult-like hive mind where we all sort of march to the exact same tune and we just reinforce each other's limited belief.
So it really requires a lot of active listening, a lot of really careful listening and empathy and understanding and kind of getting into the character of and the intention of the person that we're talking to also, yes. Because that's the only way we're going to really make that connection in a truthful way.
We talk about relationships, and essentially if we think of any of us being uprooted from wherever we feel comfortable at right now and being placed in an entirely different context, in a foreign land, foreign language, foreign cultures, we would, because we can't function alone for very long, we would tentatively begin to form relationships that allow us to get to know the people around us, strange and different as they may be, and allow them to get to know us, whatever perceived barriers they may see in that process. And that's probably the best example I can give of the approach which we actually put in place in a digital framework, where across the world we meet people from all sorts of different walks of life, different experiences, different knowledge bases, and different intents and understanding. And we still need to be able to form a meaningful connection, even if it's a temporary one, which allows us to actually get a sense that we're gaining from that in some way, in knowledge perhaps, or expertise, or even small details, and beginning to form the kind of human contact.
Yeah, and because we're coming from different contexts, we go into that foreign land where we don't know the language, and there are huge numbers of different languages being spoken, and I actually mean contextually. And so wherever we're steering ourselves, we have to almost create a new truthful language for each person we're speaking with, because there are so many misunderstandings and so many challenges in terms of aligning our communication styles, that it is like learning other people's languages all day long. I'm talking to this person now, so I'm going to talk to them in their language, and 5 minutes later, or just even in the next comment, I'm talking to the next person in yet another language. And maintaining our own consistency and integrity through all of that can be a challenge. It can, even for myself, I consider myself to be very high morality, high integrity, truthful human being. It's been kind of something I've lived by for as long as I can remember, one of my most important values. And I still find that I can question myself more than I would ever have imagined when I'm in that navigation.
Well, that's why you are the way you are, Gina, is because of the questioning. And I think, my personal take on this is that it's impossible physically to be able to adapt to everybody. And it's just not, there's too many different people, and trying to please everybody or trying to adapt so they feel comfortable with you, I personally don't see how it's physically doable. I mean, there's way too many people.
Yeah, I agree. It's more the question of how do we assess our own. A lot of people think that honesty and transparency are the same thing. And they make this assumption when we talk about being authentic and being transparent, that means they have to be honest about everything, like all the way, 100%. And there are obviously varying degrees. It's a continuum. So in that kind of leveling of the field to discover who it is you're going to connect with and who it is you're not going to be able to connect with, I think those things come into play.
But it's
and
also,
I find it really fascinating.
It's also a moving target in terms of trying to that, because just to give a couple of personal examples before David takes over, sorry. Example, I'm on the phone. I have this online ordering business for restaurants, and my son is in my car. And this lady calls one of the customers, and she wanted to ask a question. So I tell her, such and such, we, whatever. And then I hang up the phone, and my son goes, "Hey, Dad, why did you say we?" And first of all, I kind of acted like I don't know what he means. And then I wanted him to clarify it. Keep in mind, this is a 10-year-old boy here we're talking about. And he says, "I thought Take Out Online was basically just you right now, because you don't have a driver anymore," and so on and so on. And it struck me how, because I'm teaching him to try to be honest and be, have high integrity. And the guy goes, "Yeah, because it's only you. So why are you telling this lady that's we?" When I was responding about what we're going to do. And this is an example right there where the whole thing with honesty, am I being completely honest with them? No, because it's just me, the company, and yet I'm saying we like it's a bigger company, like there is more than people than me. And so the question becomes is, am I lying at that point in his eyes because I'm saying it's we? Or am I just basically kind of moving the truth a little bit for the benefit of the business and appearance of it in other people's eyes? And I think we deal with this kind of stuff all day long, all the time, with these little tiny things. And then you talk about full transparency. Yesterday I had this situation with Bluehost, hosting company. And by the way, get if you'd like, get ready soon to follow me on the collection called Oleg's Rants, because this is going to be the beginning of it. So I had this horrible experience with Bluehost and their hosting. But the little part I want to talk about here is that the guy tells me, as part of this conversation, when you see my post, you'll see all the details, but he's telling me something basically that wasn't true, number one. And number two, he says, well, if you feel this way, about me being unhappy about a bunch of things they didn't do right, why don't you move your client to another host? And so here you go into another aspect. You're saying, okay, the guy is being honest. He's telling me that if I'm this unhappy, I should move my business to another host. He's being honest, right? But at the same time, what is the guy doing? He's daring me to move my client. And absolutely, I'm going to move my client now with this kind of dare. So again, you look at it from a standpoint, the guy was totally honest with me. He told me what he thought was what he really thought. But the end result of it, he wound up killing his own business because of it. So that's where maybe you guys can take in terms of these two little examples. How do you go from, what's the level of honest being honest, in other words?
I think you made some really important points, and they tie in beautifully with a question that Kristen has wrangled up. So if we bring that up for a minute,
Yeah,
I think that'll be brilliant.
for sure. Doug Breitbart asks, and in service to unpacking this a little, what are the deltas between the meme of what is honesty versus integrity, and how are those qualified by context, values, discretion, and choice in the expressing of one's truth?
And here's the entire difficulty of everything we face. Now, essentially, we think that honesty and integrity are the same thing, and sometimes there's a huge overlap, obviously, but there are also very distinct differences. Integrity means that we sort of stick to the same expectation in the modality of our behavior, and people can expect that from us, which means they can trust us to do very specific things. Whereas honesty is being as honest and transparent and truthful as Oleg said. Instead of saying we, for instance, we can say I, even though that might hurt us personally. And here's where all the other elements begin to come in terms of context. So you might do that if it becomes an article of faith, for instance. We have historically countless instances where people decided to face death instead of backing down on something which they believed in, which was part of their faith. And the reason I use the word faith, it could be a belief system or it could be a religion. But in all those times, those things are an integral part of how we form our identity. And to actually backtrack on them or to give way on that, we feel being assailed and threatened at a very core level. It's somebody assailing our identity and who we are. And at that level, we're prepared not to give ground, and basically, we're prepared to die. So in those instances, things become very clear-cut, and it's a very black and white world from us. But in terms of if the context shifts just a little bit, and it comes to a case of you making a sale or you not making a sale, by bending the truth a little bit, then we will probably, most likely, bend the truth a little bit because the context of that doesn't cause a great deal of harm in the great scheme of things. Nobody ultimately gets hurt, knowing that perhaps instead of a company of 10 people, there's only one, and the job still gets done. And it's that slide that essentially begins to create that compartmentalized approach or contextualized approach to truthfulness, perhaps, which we encounter. There's a tendency to see this as slippery slope. The moment you start with a white lie, you're going to end up saying a lot bigger lies. And that's not true any more than it's true, the fallacious argument you have about gateway drugs, about people who smoke pot, they're going to end up at the other end of the scale, buying meth and doing all sorts of things. This doesn't happen. And certainly when it does happen, like with truthfulness and lies, it's more a reflection of failings at a core level in the person involved in a situation, rather than something generic which we can apply. So this is a trap we must never fall into. We must be able to realize that from a contextual point of view, yes, there's a greater us where we sort of bend the truth and give white lies in order to maintain an even-based relationship or not to upset the balance of things unnecessarily. And there's also a core value where our true self and honesty and integrity and identity actually begin to coincide into something which is non-negotiable. And at that core value is where we basically begin to inform all our little actions further on. So while we may say, yes, lying is bad, we can all agree to that. Truth is good, we will all agree to that. And you get your best friend, and he says to you something on the weekend, and it's total BS. So you have two choices there. Go along with it, he's your best friend. and it's, nothing's going to change in the long scheme of things. Have a massive argument with him and spoil his weekend. Now you may say, well, I was being honest. What he said was BS, and I called him out on it because I'm his friend. And usually when we do that and we apply the label brutal honesty, the argument against that is that most of the times we're more interested in being brutal than honest. And we revel in the fact that suddenly we have the moral high ground for whatever reason, and we're willing to sort of, rub somebody's face in it. I think that again is wrong. We should be able to contextualize their responses within the greater scheme of things, bearing in mind always where the absolute line we will not cross lies. And integrity always lies in identifying that line. We know somebody, how many times do we know for family members whom we trust, or rather we know, and we're willing to always engage with and have their backs, but we don't trust them, although they're family members, because we know them. And then we have friends whom we may not know so well because we don't have constant contact with them, but we will actually trust them, and vice versa. So we can see how these relationships have a constantly evolving value in them, which is constantly being calculated, and it's part of the evolution of identity, which is in itself is fluid, but everything is informed from that core. If you are rotten at the core, to use an expression, to use a cliche, then basically nothing which you do will long term is going to come to fruition, because your primary basis and primary motivation is probably wrong. But if you're fundamentally okay, things tend to work out.
That's me, by the way. Fundamentally okay.
I tend to agree, actually.
I really liked what you said about brutal versus brutal honesty, and it brings up the idea of who are you being honest for? Are you being honest or telling the truth for yourself or for the person that you're talking to? And is it something that you're trying to convince or change in someone, or is it something that you really? It's just that choice of determining why you're taking a certain action and why it's just an intentionality. And I'm really interested in that. And I think that Marilyn may have had something that she wanted to say. I saw you. Yes, Marilyn?
I think she's muted.
Yeah, we're trying to get the sound all figured out. Let's see, Marilyn, if you just, I think you should just be able to unmute yourself. But who knows? Google's always changing things, and so we might have some new features in it. Oh no!
She can't? There we go. You're up now.
Am I coming through?
You are, but barely.
Can you hear me?
You might need to shout a little bit or work from your diaphragm.
I was just thinking that I was curious about how the group felt about social media is affecting the whole concept of honesty and integrity. Do people feel more honest when they're aware that others are watching them, that they're not in isolation? The fact that so much is out there in the world and so much do you feel that has had a positive effect on honesty, or is it not a factor? I'm thinking in business in particular. Heard that.
I didn't get all of that, but I think the gist is that in terms of social media, it presents a real challenge for many different reasons. One is the context of the communication. we communicate with people in a different context, but in the same time frame of communication, even though the time zones themselves may be different, which makes the picture even more complicated. So suddenly the communication takes place at a level which is a lot more abstracted than normal. And if we fail to realize this, if we go back into our normal processes of communicating with people whom we know and they know us, or we think we know and they think they know us, then the opportunities for creating miscommunication and misunderstandings are magnified considerably. And this is something which we need to bear in mind. We need to bear in mind not because if we really fix the modality of a behavior in some way, this misunderstanding is never going to happen. I think it's inevitable that at some point it will happen simply because of the complexity and the volume of communication that is taking place. But by being able to understand this, then we devise strategies, which is the only word I can use here, in diffusing it and creating a better understanding. And those strategies have to be in place because they're part of our awareness of the complexities of the problem. So whether it's taking a step back, diffusing the emotional response we have to a situation, and being able to look at it a little bit more analytically. With Gina earlier on used the word empathy, and I think this is key. If we don't feel empathic towards our listeners and interlocutors, then we are unlikely to even come close to understanding their point of view. And given the context of our communications taking place now, the perceived differences are greater than ever. So the only way of overcoming that is actually understanding that behind those differences are people just like us with very similar concerns, operating in very similar conditions in terms of the pressures which they face. And being able to address that at that level is key to actually getting closer together, irrespective of the differences.
I would love to bring up Omi's comment. See, I had it, and now it's like gone into the ethers. Oh, okay, here we go. Omi says, there we go, got it pinned. Grateful to hear, wait, no, that's not it. Okay, I'm going to read it right from here. Omi says, not sure there are varying degrees of honesty. What about joking as a degree of honesty? Because it's easier to say the truth when you're joking. What do you think about that one?
Totally agree.
Well, yeah, yeah. I think, well, if we see Oleg's, Oleg uses humor as the primary means of communication. I think there's tremendous power in that. There's always a risk sometimes in people also misinterpreting that. They can say that he's been too flippant, that he's being ironic, he's not taking them seriously, and then the next thing you know, somebody has an emotional response to being slighted, even though Oleg's was, never was his intention. And I think all the humor perhaps diffuses things a little bit faster. It doesn't really solve anything. I think,
great.
We just
killed my day.
No, I love your sense of humor, I must say. But all I'm saying is that, it's not, unfortunately, the kind of solution which we can apply across the board and saying, that's what we need. We need more humor. Simply because of the different situations that people come from, the different perspectives, and the different degrees to which they have actually invested themselves in that particular engagement or connection. If, for instance, I didn't know Oleg, and I came in from a very serious point of view, really invested, thinking that I'm going to get a really serious point across in a conversation, and he comes across with some sort of joke, and I didn't know him, then I'm thinking, okay, this clown is really annoying me because he's making fun of what I feel very seriously, and then you get this emotional response where you need to suddenly, it becomes personal. And Oleg would think, who's this guy? Where's he coming? What's his problem?
Right?
Well, exactly.
Why
And you
so
would
serious?
you'd be 100% right to actually think that, because you'd think, you always joke, you haven't done anything which you normally have, don't do. You don't mean anything by it. It's always really cool. And when things get serious, you really come up with, a point which actually you've thought about. But in that situation, I wouldn't know it and you wouldn't know it, and we would each behave in ways which would perhaps reinforce the perception that the other guy isn't worth bothering with. And that's the inherent danger. I mean, we need to acknowledge that. We are far from perfect. These things happen even when we try very hard for them not to. And I think the moment they do, we really need to actually not ignore the problem, but actually try and solve it. Either we try and build a bridge, if possible. If it's not, perfectly all right to say, hey, nothing meant by this. Let's go our separate ways. We're not really going to achieve anything by butting heads here. It's not a school playground where we need to prove we're the alpha male. That's ridiculous. So again, that takes a certain amount of maturity, I think, and the ability to distance yourself from your primary emotional response, which...
Well, I think I would say, I don't know if I 100% agree with David on that, but to address, my view, what Omi said, it definitely no question that you can use joking, to some degree. But first of all, what David said about people misunderstanding you is definitely true. So you need to be careful who you joke with. When I say who, I mean how much do you know these people, and you need to be able to gauge what kind of response you're going to get out of them because of your joke, because it's very easy to offend somebody by joking. No question about that. And, believe me, I've done it enough myself. It's definitely doable. For good reasons or for bad reasons, it doesn't matter. The second thing about joking is that if you joke all the time, like I do, then people might think that you're not serious about anything, or you're definitely not serious about what they're saying. And you're basically almost like insulting them by not taking them seriously. And that's another thing that you got to be very careful with, because, it's one of these deals where if you're doing this intentionally, then obviously, you shouldn't be doing this, but you are doing it, you're doing it intentionally. But if you're doing this unintentionally, you need to be very careful with that, because if people think that, that whatever you're joking about is fundamentally very serious for them, like David mentioned, you do not want to be joking under any circumstances with these people on these kind of topics, either at that time or in the future. And I think it's important for people to be honest, realizing that if they do make this kind of mistake, they apologize and they do not repeat it. That's the only way to come out of it on the upside. The deal about butting heads and going separate ways is doable, but like David said, it's childish. That's not a solution to any kind of problem. So if you do get into this situation, in my view, at least that's what I do, is you need to be big enough a man to say, yeah, I didn't mean for this to have this negative impact, so you apologize and you don't do it again. So, I love joking, but that doesn't mean that, everything is about joking all the time, and jokes mean that everything is cool just because I joke. I totally understand that, without any question. May I make one point, just real quick?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. I just want to say my personal theory, which I could be totally wrong, of course I also could be totally right, is that, the fundamental thing with people is that you can't really assign a science in terms of being honest or having a high integrity. It's all in the deeds. So whatever people say, it's only part of the thing. It's what they do that makes a difference. And a lot of times the whole thing with integrity and honesty, in my opinion, is something you don't really even, you participate in it, but nobody really knows what's going on, potentially. Also, it's also a big part of it. Not that they want to put myself on the pedestal, but the other day, speaking of my online ordering deal, is, the guy ordered some food and he put $5 tip as part of the order. I get to the door and the guy hands a $5 bill. And so here's the situation. Do you take the bill, say thank you, and turn around and leave? Or do you tell the guy that he already paid the tip? Okay? If I ask David what he thought I did, he knows exactly what I did. But in many people's cases, they would happily turn around, take the $5 bill, give a big smile, and leave. And to me, it's so wrong, I can't even tell you. And that's the kind of deal, in my view. Not, like I said, I don't mean to put myself on any kind of pedestal, but to me, that's what makes people having high integrity, like what Gina was talking about, that she questions herself and she applies herself to be a certain standard for herself. Because like I always personally feel that whatever you do, in the end of the day, you have to sleep with yourself. You can be lying, you can be, whatever you are, but you still need to sleep with yourself. And, maybe for some people it means nothing. For me, it's hugely important. And I think if you look at people with all these dynamics, the main thing is you got people like Mother Teresa up here, and you got people like Hitler down there. And if you look at it, all of us are capable to be both. We all are capable to do horrible things and all capable to do great things. So to me, the integrity part comes in how low do you allow yourself to go, and at which point do you say, I'm not going any lower than this. And I think that's the deal that most people need to deal with, and a lot of people, I think, quite frankly, struggle with, because this threshold of how low you allow yourself to go. Everybody understands what's right, what's wrong. I mean, if you look at stuff, what people don't know, that killing somebody is the wrong thing. Everybody knows that. It's not anything that you need to learn in school. But at the same time, people do it, and not only do they do it, but they actually create rationale, like I was talking about that, why I thought it was a bad word, to justify it no matter what. So you have people strapping bombs on their children to go kill other children, and they say they actually are okay with this, they're actually proponents of this. I cannot even imagine how somebody can do it, but people do it because they rationalize it. And I think that's where this whole thing with conflict in all of us is, and different degrees of levels of honesty and integrity, is because of this threshold that everybody has to apply for themselves. I'm done.
If it's okay, and I'm not ignoring everything that you just said, but I would love to just add one more layer to Omi's question, if that's all right. And everything that you just said was really interesting and valuable. I'm not just skipping over it. I just want to make sure Omi is hearing everything we've got on that. And the thing that I'd like to say is that when you're using a joke in place of truth, to me, the way I understand that and the way it's been in my life and my experience is there's a level of intimacy that's implied by joking. And sometimes there's unearned intimacy. And when you're joking with someone as if you're very familiar and intimate with them, but you haven't earned that privilege with them, it can really go wrong. And that's when I think that people can become overly emotional and kind of lose their sense of stability in how to communicate with each other. So I just wanted to throw that in about humor before we completely move off of that.
Yeah, that's very true. But that's all part of the relationship building. A relationship is an increasing amount of awareness of another person's positions and positioning. And, you know, depending on the degree to which you actually know the other person, that's when you actually can make allowances or not.
Yeah.
When you don't know them, the allowances you can make are very few.
Right.
And when you do know them, you can make a great many.
Marilyn is having trouble joining us because of her sound, but she does have a question.
Okay.
She would like to know if you can be honest with others if you're not able to be honest with yourself.
That's an easy answer to actually give. Essentially, the outward conduct of ourselves is a mix of expectations and circumstances on the outside and what we bring in on the inside. So if you're not being honest with yourself primarily, then you're unlikely to be able to sustain any kind of honest relationship with those people around you. Now, historically and scientifically, we actually have a huge amount of, a huge corpus of research which looks at, of all things, undercover agents, double agents, and undercover cops. People who essentially have to assume a different identity at a level that is convincing enough to infiltrate a gang, an organization, or a country. And what comes across every time is that the most successful operatives in those situations essentially create an identity that is as believable to them as those people around them. They share the same values, they share the same convictions, they're capable of the same deeds, and there's an enormous number of ways they can intellectualize the process and justify it. And they are, to many degrees, indistinguishable from those people. So in order not to lie to those around them, they basically become that. Obviously, there's a disconnect somewhere where they actually also have to do a job, but that's why they're not left alone. They have a handler always who is capable and in charge of assessing their mental and psychological balance and pulling them out of a situation if things become too difficult, and also acts as their moral compass, guiding them on what they should be doing. Now, if we think about this, here are adults working in an extremely difficult situation, displaying skill sets which we can only imagine how complex they are in building identities and sustaining them, and they need external guidance in order to do the right thing. That should tell us everything.
If you look at actors, it's a perfect example of people being able to do things. No, seriously, people being able to completely step into a totally different persona than themselves. And of course, they're doing it for a reason, being on screen. But that because they're able to do it, that there's nothing that says they couldn't do it in real life.
Um, well, I think, I mean, the study hasn't looked at actors, I must say, but actors come in different degrees. I mean, there are actors who are themselves in every part, and Jack Nicholson is one of them. You know, it doesn't matter what role you see him in, he's actually Jack Nicholson always. And, you know, essentially his core self informs what he does. And then you get actors like, and I can't remember his name now, and although I'm a fan, the person who played Hawkeye in The Last of the Mohicans, and he's a method actor. You know, to play that part, he went and lived in a cabin in the woods for 5 months, and he lived in the wild to actually, so he actually became the part. He wasn't lying to himself when he was on screen. He had actually taken the time to do that. And he was also in another film called The Boxer, where he trained for 3 years with a professional boxing trainer for the part. And when the film was over, obviously it was over, but the guy who trained him said that if he had needed to actually go into boxing, he would have ranked because he was that good. Now, this again tells us a lot about honesty. You know, some actors can't lie the way you and I perceive lying. They have to become the part, in which case they're not lying to themselves. And others are playing a part, and for them it's a conscious role, a conscious act of acting, and they bring in the core value of who they are, and we can see whom they are in every film. And you know, we actually go to see the actor as opposed to the role the actor portrays. So you know, these are the two different things. And just remember the name of the actor. It's Daniel Day-Lewis, who played in Last of the Mohicans, and he's a phenomenal actor. He, you know, if you look at his performance in every film, he brings a certain depth of integrity, I suppose, in the way he portrays the role. That you think, you know, how can you possibly do that? Well, that's how he does it. He actually becomes the part.
It's funny because, like, having, you know, come from an acting background, the general consensus between actors is that the method actors they're the crazy ones.
Crazy, yeah, they're crazy. Yeah. Well, you're right, because I mean, this is again, you know, those who are actors in the more traditional sense of the word, they look at method actors, and their thing is, you should try acting sometime.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you know, but again, I think that comes down to the ability to what you bring to a role. You know, most actors perhaps take on roles which they think they can portray because they have an affinity for them through their own core values and awareness. And then those other actors who are so unhinged, perhaps, from who they are, that they can essentially transform themselves into that part. So they take roles where they can see themselves morphing into somebody else. Both are informed by the same basis. I.e., can I portray this convincingly? Can I make it true? Can I stop lying to myself? Those actors who think, oh, it's just a facade, I put on a mask and I go out there and do it, they never make it because they're just not good enough at acting, essentially.
No, but my point was that since there are some actors who can switch different, you know, like almost becoming a different person, I think that goes to what Gina said about people's ability, maybe not for everybody, maybe not to a perfection, but people can be completely dishonest with themselves for X amount of time to accomplish the end result, whatever that may be. A lot of times it's in, you know, in criminal, and a lot of times it's in all kinds of things. But we do possess this capability as humans, at least some of us, to be able to do and be different than what we actually are.
Yeah. Well, we certainly tell ourselves stories all the time. We're constantly fabricating the world around us in order to make it survivable. So yes. I think there are a lot of levels on which we're lying to ourselves, and we don't even know it. We're not even aware of it. And then even if we're lucky enough to discover that we are, we will still do it again tomorrow because it's part of being human.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, there's several points here. First of all, to address what Oleg said, I don't think method actors are actually lying to themselves. They have the ability, or the superpower, if you like, to morph into somebody else. And if they can't do that, they won't take on the role. So they're being honest, and exhibiting high integrity in that respect. They will do the parts which they feel they can actually bring to life. And when they do them, they have become those parts in their heads. So there's no lying involved, really, which is why they're so convincing. And in terms of what Gina said, essentially, we are, as identities, the sense of identity we have, who we are, is a constantly evolving narrative. It is constantly morphing and changing, and how far that evolves from reality comes down to what kind of anchor have we got in ourselves. And people who, within inverted commas, lose it, essentially they lose touch with reality simply because they allow the narrative in their heads to completely disengage from what they're doing, and that's when a lot of issues come up. And again, it shows how important it is. But all of these things don't happen in a vacuum. They're informed by our connections, the feedback we get, the societies we move into, the circles we move into, and how we essentially create the social identity element of that from those connections.
I would really love... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's inherent disconnect, basically, in humans between what they want and what other people want. And so I think there is, the way I look at it is that people inherently, the way we wouldn't be here, in my opinion, in terms of society being actually on this planet, if we did not have any kind of self-preservation capabilities. So in other words, if you take any sales courses, they'll tell you that everybody's listening to one radio station. You know what one radio station is? WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. So everybody that tells you about sales, this is what you need to understand, that people want that. Don't tell them about features. Don't tell them about you. Tell them about their benefits, what they're getting. This is how you sell stuff. It's because they care about themselves, so you need to play up to that. So that's one thing, is we care about things for us. We want to do something, us time for ourselves and everything else. Then on the other hand, you have this situation that I was talking about, sharing, and we have a need to interact with others. We just have to have that in place. That's why we get married and so on and so on. You got families and all of that. So the problem is with everyone doing the what's in it for me, the question becomes, what are you doing for somebody else? Because if you're doing everything for yourself, then you're this egotistic narcissist that nobody wants to deal with, because it's all about you and nobody else. So it's basically a give and take, and you end up with a situation where the taking part is something you like. Everybody likes it to some degree, but at the same time, you need to be doing the giving part, and the narcissists are the people who can't do any giving. And so you have this conflict constantly going on between needing to do both to make relationships work, and that's why I think we have constant struggles. That's why we have 50% marriages failing, is because of that as well. It's because you have a situation where if each person wants what's in it for them, then there is no give. It's nothing but take. And of course, if there's no compromise, then you have nothing. And so that's why I think where the fundamental problem is, that lack of this interest to do something for somebody else. And as Beatles, my favorite all-time group, sang one time in their song in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And I think I'm a huge believer in that. And for a lot of people, it's a problem, I think.
It could be. I mean, I don't agree that I agree that our primary motivation in every case is how we benefit, because that's what we're hardwired to do. I think that the context of that benefit can change. It can be something very short-term or something very long-term. And depending on that context, you can get some fantastic things happening. So
let me ask you one question, David, honestly, okay? When you do something for somebody else, are you doing it strictly because of them, or are you doing it for some other reason?
When I do something for somebody else, irrespective of whether I'm going to get something out of it back or not, it is always about me. Because essentially when I do it, even though I don't expect anything back from them, it makes me feel good, and I'm aware of that.
Exactly. Thank you, David. Handshake, big time. It's exactly my point I was trying to make right there. Is even when we do something for others, in the end, we're still really doing it for ourselves because of the feeling we get and everything else. Absolutely.
Yeah,
100%
absolutely. Yeah, I agree totally. But within that, there's also my belief in terms of my long-term belief in terms of how the world works best, and I know that if I do keep on doing that, and some other person does that as a result, suddenly we all sort of come together in shaping that world and making it come about, and it's happened through tiny connections and people doing small acts.
And that's where our road splits on that point.
However, it's a really great segue into Michael Abbott's comment.
Okay.
And the best
okay,
that I can do with Google Translate.
You can read it out to us, Kristen.
Okay. Google Translate. True, out time and preferences, whom whatsoever honor and honesty, actions, and prudence define the essence, man, as regards freedom, that onoia, consistent outlook, tolerance, ethics, and behavior and morals. And whenever I read Michael's comments, I get so much from them. And maybe it's because of the key words that he uses, but it's always so beautiful to me.
Very poetic.
It is
Yes.
very poetic. He's always like that in his comments, and I have to admit. So yes. Okay, I mean, we talk about ethics and morals, and I must admit that all these are relativistic social creations or social structures. Essentially, if we all agree today that murder is fine, and we had very clearly determined steps on when it is fine, we'd find nothing wrong with murder. Sure enough, there will be some people who say, oh, maybe this isn't right, but as a majority, we would go with that, and this is really scary. So essentially, the conditions we create, obviously murder is not fine, and we all agree to that. But we have to ask, why is it that we find it not fine? And it's not essentially, we dress it up as morality. It's not fine because it is not a way to move forward in a way that actually ensures our survival, and that's the way it actually is. If we look at historically certain societies where they had to make very hard calls, very recently I watched a documentary on the Spartan society, where they practiced infanticide. Essentially, any infant that was not 100% healthy, they assigned to death straight away. And you think, they were as clever as we were, they had the same kind of brain, had the same kind of outlook in the world, they were people just like us. But as a society, they structured themselves culturally in that way, and none of them found anything wrong with that. And that's really scary again. There have been examples, we sometimes refer to Nazi Germany, and, at the beginning of this, Oleg mentioned Mother Teresa and Hitler, and yet both of them in their way are very they exhibit a high degree of integrity in the way they behave. Mother Teresa would never behave like Hitler, so there's a high degree of integrity in her behavior, and Hitler would never behave like Mother Teresa. And again, we wouldn't expect him to. So there's an exhibit of a high integrity value in his value set. And is it wrong? From our perspective, definitely. From his, possibly no. But it just goes to show how flexible these things are, and how they're driven by the social constructs we put in place, to which we, each one of us, actually has a degree of responsibility. When we look at Nazi Germany and the essential Nazism and the horrible things that were done under that label, and the intellectual justifications that were actually provided for them, what strikes us as horrific, what makes it so easy for us to label it as evil, is the fact that so few people actually took objection to it, how an entire nation could go along with it, and a lot of them turned a blind eye to things which have been done in atrocities. Quite a few didn't, it has to be said. But, we think, whoa, why? And if you look at the conditions which made that possible, and if we then project ourselves into those conditions, the really tough situation and a sense of despair that pre-Nazi Germany experienced, it is quite conceivable that we would also behave in a very similar way. So it always gives me food for thought. And again, Oleg mentioned the despicable act of parents strapping explosives to their children and sending them to their death as suicide bombers, and justifying that from an intellectual or perhaps faith point of view. But again, if you think of the sense of despair that it takes to actually justify that action, if we were in their shoes, I don't think it would be doing much different. Which again, without justifying what they're doing from our perspective, it makes it possible to sort of understand a little bit and have a sense of empathy for their condition.
Not for me. No way. No way under any circumstances would they say I have any empathy for people who kill their children this way. Absolutely not.
I know, I'm not justifying it. What I'm saying is...
to a way you are, because you're saying if we were in the same position, we'd probably do the same thing, which in a way is justifying that you can see how they look at it this way. When you start looking at people like Nazi Germany and people like the terrorists and saying that you can see how that could be done, then basically you're equaling the field, saying under these circumstances everybody would do it, so that's why it's okay. And we, to me, as people, need to make a point and say, no, this is not okay. This is not a civilized way to behave. This is not a way to make a point. There are better ways to do it. This is not okay. Something is not okay. It's just under any circumstances. Something is not okay. But anyway, going from murder, let's go into a little bit less heavy question from Marilyn.
Wait. I'm not done with that one.
Okay. Sorry.
Through education, we will learn a better way. And that's why it's so important to make education as free as possible and freely accessible to as many people as possible. And so for those of us who know better, are we doing everything on our part to, according to our integrity, to make education possible?
It's wishful thinking, Kristen, I'm sorry. It's wishful thinking because, you know, we can say things like this here in America with our Wi-Fis and our, you know, milkshakes and everything else. For the people in Palestine, there is no way they can get to the level you're talking about easily under the conditions they live in. That's where
right, exactly, under the conditions that they live in. And if
we
are so gluttonous over here, then
we're not gluttonous.
We look at our brothers and sisters elsewhere and see them as our brothers and sisters.
It's not gluttonous. All of this stuff was built by people. It wasn't like somebody handed it to the Americans saying, here you go, here's all the stuff, live in this level of lifestyle. All of this was built by people. So everybody has a chance to do revolutions, just like Americans did, just like the French did, just like the Russians did. And there's, you know, consequences of how it happens, what happens, everything else. It hasn't been given to somebody to be that way. Palestinians, you know, which, as you can tell, I don't have any respect for because of their actions, they have a choice. Okay, they can also choose to say, we want to go out to the UN and we want to change, we want to live in peace with our neighbors. They can do that. That they can do. But they're not doing that. Okay, what they're doing is they're sending their kids to die and being happy about it. And I'm just saying I have zero empathy for that. But in terms of giving them the education, we can't bring the Wi-Fi over to their area. It's just not something that's physically doable. They need to realize in the world they live in that they need to make some changes on their own. Just like the settlers here in America decided that the British nonsense, sorry, David, no disrespect intended, is not going to happen. We need to do something different. And so they actually did something, and, you know, so that's the way it is.
And of course, when you say Palestinians, you are not speaking about every single one, because we all know that we can't completely generalize over any nation.
Just like I'm not speaking about Americans, being that all the Americans, if you listen to me, are these phenomenal people who can do no wrong and things like that. And we also have Americans like Jeffrey Dahmer and Timothy McVeigh, and, you know, I can name a number of other names. So of course not. I mean, obviously people there are some Russians that are phenomenal people, and yet I'm down on Russia every time I talk about them. You know, it just, obviously there's people. But if you look at it as a society in general, in terms of what they do as quote-unquote Palestinians, and then what Americans do as quote-unquote Americans, then, yeah, we're not saying that every single person is bad or every single person is good. That's not true of any country.
That's important to me to bring out, because I look at Americans from an outsider's perspective, and I'm like, wow, we're really dumb, and we are so myopic. You know, we are just so self-centered. We just think the whole world is about us, and we think that everyone is just thinking about, like, us. And so from having that perspective, it's just very important to me to make sure that we define that and make sure that it's very clear that we are not making any overgeneralizations.
I'm one of those damn foreigners, and I can tell you that Americans have a lot to be proud of, number one, and number two, they're not dumb by any stretch. Okay, dumb people do not build what Americans have built here. And I'm talking as an outsider coming in, okay, because I've seen the other side, and I came here and I saw what was done here. And also considering the shortness of American lifespan in terms of how short, I mean, how little the country has been in existence compared to everybody else, it's amazing what America has done. Okay, there's nothing dumb about it. At the same time, some Americans do not see the perspective the way, for example, I see it, because I lived in Soviet Union, now I live here. And with that, Marilyn had a question about business. And the question was, since nobody else is reading it, in terms of business, if a company admits its mistakes, while they may be honest, do they lose trustworthiness?
That's an interesting one, and the answer is no. We have evidence of that. Essentially, it comes down to expectation and perceived expectation and conduct. We all know that it's impossible to be perfect 100% of the times. It doesn't matter who you are, what your values are, how much effort you put into this. Things are going to go wrong. And what actually makes me willing to take a risk, within inverted commas, and enter into a relational exchange with anybody is my perception of what they're going to do when things go wrong. Frequently with Oleg, we talk about Amazon because it's in his hometown, but they're also a phenomenal organization. They're pretty faceless, but at the same time, they go into great lengths in bridging and creating trust points with their audience. And one of the things which they have is that, if you buy anything from Amazon, essentially you can send it back, no questions asked, and you're going to get a refund or replacement product. If we actually examine that transaction from a purely business point of view, the logic there is totally flawed. You think, you guys are crazy, people are going to take advantage, you're going to lose a lot of money, this is not a way for a business to carry on. What you need to do is say, we're a reputable company, we go into great lengths to make sure that everything goes okay. If you take it, you have 10 days to bring it back, and it has to be a number of conditions to make it difficult, potentially, for people to actually do that. They don't do that. They remove all the obstacles. So essentially what they've done is they made themselves vulnerable, and they've created an imbalance of power, giving the power to the consumer to take advantage if they so wish. What happens? Well, consumers usually don't take advantage. You are able to move forward if things go wrong because Amazon will set it right. So to come back to Marilyn's question very, very specifically, a company that makes a mistake is essentially at that moment in time being judged by its ability to fix it, how human they're going to behave, how quickly they're going to fix it, how much they will remove the obstacles to solving that problem. And the better they are at doing those three things, the more willing we are to trust them, even though they made a mistake. And if they go the corporate route where they, first of all, it's not our problem, then, oh, maybe it is our problem, but did you do this, did you do that? Oh, yeah, you did all that, it's still our problem, okay, now you're going to jump through hoops and we'll help you. Well, that kind of experience, none of us want, because we're headed up to here with it. We know it's false. We know it doesn't serve anybody. We know it's unnecessarily complex and really doesn't serve anybody's interest. And it needs to go away. So any company that behaves like that, it's a dinosaur. It won't be around much longer. Companies are constantly evolving on this and not stupid. So we are seeing changes.
And with that said, I would add that Amazon is just absolutely exceptional. Not only in what David said, but also I had, my own experience with them, where I bought a product from a third party that Amazon sends you basically. You know how a lot of people can sell on Amazon, but it's actually a third-party company. And this was a situation where they did basically they sent me a used product, charged me for a brand new price, and then that used product did not exactly work right, and I tried to return it anyway. It was a total nightmare dealing with them. So I went directly to Amazon. They immediately refunded my money, immediately. And then they dealt with this company on their own. To me, these people are absolutely gold. And I will buy everything and anything I can because of this one incident like that, because of the way they treated me like this. This one incident.
We trust them all because of what you just said, right? Because
exactly.
I dread, as a consumer, buying things digitally across countries, exactly that kind of experience, which you just said. It's too stressful. I just need the transaction to go smoothly. Right. You get a kind of possibility that, if things go wrong, we set it right just like that. I'm thinking, okay, I'll do it. Because there's trust there. And you're right.
And this trust is made by a deed. That's the thing that I wanted to emphasize, it's not about words being spoken or promises being made or promises being broken. It's not about any of this. It's actually deed that's being done, so you can physically see what's happening, and then people realize, A, how honest you are, and this is an example of company having high integrity. They're not saying they're not making any mistakes. David is absolutely right. Everybody makes mistakes, including Amazon at some point. But at the same time, how you react to these mistakes, that's the key thing about having high integrity and about being honest and taking care of things the way a business is supposed to take care of them.
Yep, I agree.
We are coming upon the hour. Actually, we're past the hour, but I just want to pretend like we're coming upon it. This has been a fantastic discussion. I think that we should, if you guys are up to it, maybe try to plan to have a second, because I think we've opened up several can of worms here that we could totally expand upon.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Personally, I think it's terrible because I lied, because I indicated today was supposed to be a discussion about women. I actually put in a post it was going to be about women, and I thought we were going to discuss details of who is Gina Fiedel and who is Kristen and who is Marilyn. Marilyn, of course, figured out how to screw up her microphone so she doesn't have to deal with any of this. And the rest of the ladies, nobody said about anything about that. So we have to do this again.
Oh, it's been supposed to be about you and David this whole time. So yeah. We accomplished our mission.
It was a ruse, right?
Which means I lied, is what my problem is.
Well, yeah, you did a little bit.
Well, maybe you didn't lie, Oleg. Wasn't that a classic bait and switch which salespeople always apply?
Exactly. It was like my post from yesterday. Oh, you guys thought it was about collections. No, it was really
There were no bikinis involved, though.
No bikinis.
Only tiaras. Yeah.
There was a tiara. Well, we have another tradition that we like to wrap up our show with, and that's the shameless self-promotion.
Good job.
Thank you. We would love to give you each an opportunity to just tell us briefly about what you have coming up in the next week and what you have going on. Let's start with, let's go. First person in my strip, I have Marilyn. Can you? Let's try to see what happens. Let's see. Well, we have your lovely face, and it looks like you're unmuted, but we still have no sound. Okay, let's come back and let's see if it will work. Okay, so I'm next in the film strip, so I don't know. I have the next, whatever is next coming up, and we'll move on to Gina.
Well, I have a couple things going on that aren't really ready for public consumption, but I am involved in a collaborative ebook project about social media with some really cool people that I respect a lot, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm also involved in a new sort of mini-series that John Moore and Marilyn Moore have conceived, and they've asked me to join them with that. It's about web development and web design, so that's going to be fun to kind of be in some of my own territory on that. So
that is super cool.
Yeah,
I can't wait to hear more about that. I'm like in the dark there, so yay, that's so exciting. And that also made me remember that we have a show with the Fab Gang of 4 coming up next week with John Keldon, Zara Alter, and Griswold Grin, myself. And we're going to be talking all about adventure. So that's my thing that I have coming up. Oleg, you're next.
Let me unmute myself. I thought Marilyn was trying to say something here. Let's see.
Yeah, we have hers now.
Okay, so it says she's got Martin Shervington on the Small Business Web Tech Show next Tuesday. How to build your brand on Google+. Okay, so that's what Marilyn has coming up.
Nice.
Okay, that's it, Marilyn. I can also translate into Russian if that will help.
Where were you when we were pulling up Michael Abbott's comment?
To be honest with you, one of the questions I had, no disrespect to the man, but I read some of his comments. I don't know how you guys get it. A lot of his stuff I just don't get, and I speak fluently. So he puts all these words, separate words, and you have to anyway.
Maybe what he's doing is he's trying to make it easier on us. Then that would make sense if he's trying to bridge the gap.
Okay, possibly. Maybe I should use Google Translate for Russian now. I got a couple of things. So first of all, Gina mentioned she's going to be working on a project with some people she respects a lot. For the record, I haven't been invited to that project, which I'm assuming that's that she doesn't respect me. But that too much into it. No, two things I got going on are, one thing is I'm really totally irritated at my son's school. And that combined with the fact that what I think could be done should be done, I'm starting this website called HangoutSchool.com. And so I'm going to be doing a bunch of stuff next week about that in terms of people who have homeschooled kids, people who want to have more than public school allows. Basically, it's a way to have kids be able to take classes, combine classes, basically kids and adults too, with, decent and appropriate teachers, and just to take classes on whatever topic. So we're going to have music class, art classes, different things. So that's one project. Second project is, and if you go to hangoutschool.com right now, you can see some information. Second shameless plug is the new thing I'm calling Spec Zone, which is going to be an IT in a box type service for small businesses, where a lot of small businesses can't afford to have their own IT departments. So essentially, they'll be able to do that in an online environment for a fraction of the cost of having an IT department and still get the benefits they would normally get from an IT department. So that's another thing that's coming up. That's all my shameless plugs.
Super cool. All right, David, you are up.
Well, I've got a book coming out in about 10 weeks' time, I think, if the schedule is right, which is about trust and how we actually calculate it, and how it is propagated across digital connections. And there's a few other projects I'm working on, but that's the only one I can talk about at the moment.
Yeah, you always have a little bit of mystery, don't you?
No, it's okay. It all comes down to what you signed at the beginning of a project.
So true. Okay, another thing that we do is we like to give our last final thoughts on honesty and integrity. So I'm just going to pull this up. Whoever raises their hand first. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll
David
go first.
Does. Okay.
We always talk about honesty and integrity. We assume always that we know exactly what they are, and that always begins the conversation from our perspective, from a position of absolutism, which normally doesn't entail a lot of give and take. And I think it is good to bear in mind that these things are contextual to some degree, or they're informed by core values. And in a brand new platform like the one we're in right now, they need to be redefined. And that requires conversation, requires analysis, and it requires a lot of hard thinking. And if we do those things, we'll be able to move forward faster.
Beautiful. Anyone else? I'm perfectly happy to end there.
I'll just say, it's very similar to what David was just saying. My own discovery over the past few months focusing on this, the absolutes fall apart pretty quickly, and we enter into things assuming and trusting ourselves to be a certain way, and if we start to examine and start to question our own motivation, our own inner stories, our own delusions, if you will, we can really uncover a much more solid and dependable level of honesty to ourselves and to the people that we're engaging with.
Yeah, Marilyn here said that honesty and integrity are not the quote-unquote right thing to do. It's a requirement for success. And I think she's absolutely right, no question about that. I mean, if you look at most honest people, it's one of these deals like David always preaches, and as his new book is going to, I'm sure, talk about, is the trust. And if you don't come out across with honesty and having high integrity, people are not going to trust you, which means they're not going to deal with you, which means you're not going to be successful, because you can't be successful without other people in deals. So to me, the way I look at it is, number one, you need to look at how the feedback you get from other people in terms of how well you do in terms of honesty and integrity, what others think of you from that standpoint. So that's kind of a little bit of a gauge. You can't use it 100% of the time, because you know yourself what's what, what's not, and different people have different agendas. So on. But overall, you can get a feel for if you're doing okay when it comes to honesty and integrity or not. Because after all, you're being honest. You need to be honest with yourself, but at the same time, you're interacting with other people. So it's their opinion that's also very valid about how honest and how high of integrity you have. And number two is you got to have an open mind. The important thing is you need to have an open mind, because what Gina said, in my view, is absolutely essential. And the only way it's doable is if you have an open mind. Because if you have this rigid belief that you're always right and everybody else is always wrong, it's not going to fly. You need to be able to have open mind. You need to be able to change your mind, because if somebody who you respect sits down and tells you that you're wrong or something needs to be different, then if they have high integrity, then you need to be open-minded enough to change your opinion, and that's where things begin to work in terms of relationships, in terms of eventually becoming successful, everything else. If you don't have that, you have nothing. That's my take.
Agreed.
So we all agree.
Pretty much, yeah. Amazing, right?
We are agreed. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on the Network Roundtable Softer Side of Business, where we look at core values and how they relate to business. It's been a joy and a blast to have everybody here. Thank you so much, and we'll be looking forward to our part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.